Welcome to the Deep Dives.
Mm-hmm.
Today we're pulling from a pretty dense stack of theological essays, some historical linguistics, and biblical commentaries.
Yeah, quite a bit of reading for this one.
Right. And it's all specifically anchored by this core text called Prayer as a Return to the Father. And the mission of this deep dive is basically to completely dismantle how modern culture views prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Because for a lot of people, the concept of prayer carries just this heavy, heavy burden of frustration.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you pour your heart out, you ask for intervention in some deeply broken situation, and the response is often just a crushing, empty silence.
Right, which is brutal.
It is. It leaves people feeling like they're either doing it wrong or worse, that the entity on the other end just doesn't care at all.
Yeah, and that frustration really stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of the architecture of the relationship. I mean, modern culture has implicitly trained us to view prayer as, well, a utilitarian mechanism.
Like a transaction.
Exactly like a transaction. We treat it like a lever we pull to, adjust the mechanics of the universe to our liking. And when we input our distress and the desired output doesn't materialize, we just assume the connection is dead.
We think the vending machine is broken.
Right. But the source material we're examining today suggests that this transactional approach isn't just slightly off. It's actually the exact opposite of what prayer was originally understood to be.
And to understand that original intent, we really have to look at the language itself, which I found fascinating.
Oh, the linguistics are incredible.
Yeah, because the texts we're analyzing dig into the ancient linguistic roots of the word prayer. And what struck me immediately is how physical the terminology is. I mean, none of the ancient words suggest closing your eyes and just sort of passively sending thoughts into the ether.
Right. It's not telepathy. The etymology paints a really vivid, kinetic picture.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the Hebrew origins, words like tefillah and hitpalo, they don't mean merely wishing for something. They carry the connotation of intercession, like actually stepping in.
Exactly. Literally stepping into the middle of bringing a tangible situation before a judge or a king. It's a legal, very active stance.
Okay.
And then you have the Aramaic roots, lichta and ali, which bring a different dimension. They focus on the physical imagery of yielding, like literally bowing the body down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the Greek terms used in the New Testament, prosecha and prosekumai, those are highly directional. They describe the act of turning one's face or speech directly toward another person.
So every single one of those ancient concepts demands movement.
Yes.
You step in, you bow down, you turn your face. You're initiating this profound shift in posture.
You're bringing your unvarnished reality, right? Your guilt, your terror, your joy. You're bringing all of that to a being you fundamentally cannot control.
Right.
And that specific lack of control is deeply unsettling to the human psyche. Well, yeah, which brings us to the core conflict of this whole thing.
Yeah.
If all these ancient languages agree that prayer is just an active turning toward God, right, just a simple movement of the soul, then the sheer amount of psychological baggage modern people have around it doesn't really make sense.
Right.
Like, where did we pick up the instinct to run the other way? And the text traces this deeply ingrained resistance all the way back to the Eden narrative.
Yeah, this part is brilliant.
I found this analysis so fascinating because it totally reframes the whole concept of original sin.
It does. The text points out a nuance in the Genesis story that is just often entirely overlooked. You know, the serpent in the garden never attempted to convince Adam and Eve that God didn't exist.
Right.
Atheism wasn't the temptation. The temptation was basically an assassination of God's character.
Wow, yeah.
The serpent planted the idea that God was withholding the knowledge of good and evil because he was threatened by human potential.
The suggestion was like God is holding out on you.
Exactly.
Like he's not a benevolent creator.
Yeah.
He is a competitor.
Right. And the psychological fallout of viewing your creator as a competitor is massive. I mean, think about it. The moment you believe the source of life is actually trying to limit your life, you're forced into a posture of extreme self-preservation.
Right, because you have to protect yourself from him.
Exactly. You feel compelled to secure your own existence, your own resources, your safety, even if it means rebelling against the very structure of reality.
Yeah.
And the immediate byproduct of that profound mistrust is just overwhelming terror. The text highlights Adam's reaction perfectly. I was afraid, so I hid.
I was afraid, so I hid.
Yeah.
That instinct to hide our flaws, our vulnerabilities, our failures, it's practically the defining characteristic of the human condition today.
Oh, absolutely.
We curate our lives on social media to look entirely self-sufficient. We hide everything.
Yep.
So if hiding is the ultimate symptom of this broken competitive relationship with the divine, this text posits that prayer is the specific antidote. It's the conscious, terrifying decision to stop running.
Hmm.
You know, you don't need to have your theology perfectly aligned. You just stop hiding and say, here I am, completely exposed.
And that paradigm shift changes the entire metric of success for a spiritual life.
How so?
Well, prayer doesn't begin with reciting the correct formula or having, perfectly pure motives. It begins with the raw, terrifying vulnerability of simply refusing to hide.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about the necessity of that vulnerability.
Yeah.
But honestly, I have to push back here on behalf of anyone who has actually tried this.
Sure.
Because you stop running, you turn around, you strip away your ego, you say, here I am, and God seems to be the one hiding.
Right.
You step into your room, you pour out your deepest, darkest fears regarding, a terminal diagnosis or a collapsing marriage, and the response is just a devastating silence.
Yeah.
How does the text defend that without sounding like it's just making excuses for God's absence?
That's a great question, and the author refuses to sanitize that experience. The text acknowledges that the hiddenness of God is a brutal, recurring biblical reality.
Okay.
In fact, it actively warns against gaslighting people who are experiencing that silence.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, telling someone, oh, God is always speaking, you just don't have enough faith to hear him, is a deeply toxic approach that the source material wholly rejects.
Because it's just spiritual victim blaming.
It is entirely spiritual victim blaming. But the text does offer a profound theological framework for why this hiddenness exists in the first place, and it centers on the cultivation of actual human freedom.
Okay, let's ground this, because human freedom can sound like a bit of a philosophical cop-out.
Fair enough.
Think about a parenting dynamic. The way I read it, it reminds me of teaching a toddler to walk.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right, because if a parent never, ever lets go of the child's hand, the child will never fall and scrape their knee. They remain perfectly safe. But they also never develop the neurological pathways to balance on their own. The parent has to step back, creating this frightening space of physical separation so the child can actually learn the mechanics of walking.
Exactly. And that parenting dynamic translates perfectly to the theological argument the text is making. Because if God's presence were as undeniable and immediate as, say, a physical law of nature...
Like gravity.
Right, like gravity. If every good deed resulted in an immediate, tangible reward...
$100 bull falls from the sky.
Exactly. And every selfish act resulted in a lightning strike.
Right.
Human behavior would adapt instantly.
For sure.
But that adaptation wouldn't be rooted in love or morality.
It would just be pure survival instinct. We would be sycophants.
We would be purely reacting to overwhelming dominant power. Goodness would devolve into a highly calculated self-serving strategy.
Yeah.
We would be terrified into submission, which basically recreates the exact dynamic of Adam hiding in the garden, just with a different flavor of fear.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So the text argues that God deliberately maintains a degree of ambiguity, a specific hiddenness, so as not to crush our agency.
That distance provides the space.
Exactly. The distance provides the necessary space for a human being to approach the divine out of genuine trust and voluntary love, rather than out of calculated greed or sheer terror.
So he steps back, so we aren't literally crushed by the gravity of his presence.
Yes.
But okay, that still leaves us with a massive practical problem.
Okay.
Because if God is deliberately maintaining this silent distance to protect our free will, how do we get any answers?
Right.
Are we just talking to the wall to emotionally regulate ourselves? Is it just therapy?
Well, no, and the source material draws heavily on the teachings of Jesus to counter the idea that prayer is merely a psychological coping mechanism.
Okay.
It presents a father who genuinely hears and acts. The disconnect happens because humans and God use different mediums of communication.
What do you mean?
Well, we rely heavily on verbal language, right? We want to hear a voice. But the text suggests that God primarily communicates through events.
Events rather than words.
Exactly.
And the text provided some incredibly grounded examples of how this actually manifests in everyday life situations. Like, it's rarely a parting the Red Sea level miracle.
No, almost never.
Often, the answer is just a sudden, inexplicable shift in a deeply entrenched conflict.
Yeah.
It's a specific doctor looking at a chart from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
It's a random phone call from an estranged friend at the exact moment you were spiraling into isolation.
And crucially, those events maintain that necessary ambiguity we were talking about.
Right, they don't force you to believe.
Exactly. They do not violate the rule of hiddenness. A skeptic can easily write those moments off as mere coincidence, a trick of probability.
Sure.
But to the person who has been sitting in the silence of prayer, that convergence of events is recognized as a profound, intimate answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. My favorite example from the text, though, was the internal shift.
Oh.
Sometimes the situation doesn't change at all.
Right.
The illness is still there, the bank account is still empty, but the person praying suddenly discovers this bizarre, welling internal strength to bear a tragedy that simply cannot be fixed. The answer is the endurance itself.
Right.
Or, even more profoundly, the person praying realizes that they are the required intervention.
That is such a powerful concept.
It is. You spend weeks praying for someone to help a marginalized group in your community.
Yeah.
And slowly, the realization dawns on you. Wait a minute. I have the resources. I have the time. I am the one being sent.
Yeah, and that is the moment the relationship becomes truly dynamic. The human will and the divine will begin to overlap.
Right.
But navigating that process, especially when we are in deep distress, requires a blueprint. And the text points to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane as the absolute masterclass in relational prayer.
Okay, let's analyze Gethsemane, because the context there is just pure psychological agony.
Complete agony.
Jesus is fully aware he's about to be betrayed, tortured, and executed. He is reportedly sweating blood. He is not sitting in some serene, detached meditation.
No, not at all.
His prayer is, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will.
Yeah. There's a three-part movement in that single sentence that fundamentally redefines how to approach the divine.
Okay, walk me through it.
First, he anchors himself in the relationship before making any demands. He uses the term Abba, an intimate, familial word for father.
Right.
He is establishing trust in the character of the one he is speaking to. He is actively fighting that Eden suspicion we talked about.
Saying you are a father, not a competitor.
Exactly. Then comes the raw, unfiltered truth. Remove this cup from me. I deeply appreciate that he doesn't play the stoic philosopher here.
Oh, totally. He doesn't pretend he transcends physical pain or the fear of death.
No, he lays out his exact, desperate human desire to escape the suffering. He brings his authentic reality to the relationship.
Which is so refreshing.
It really is. But it's the third movement that anchors the entire theology of prayer. Not what I will, but what you will.
Yeah.
He voices his desperate preference, but he radically opens the final script to God. He refuses to trap the divine into a single acceptable outcome.
He's essentially saying, this is what I desperately want, but I trust your ultimate vision for life more than my immediate desire for safety.
Exactly. That is open-handed trust.
And the text makes a really fascinating observation here regarding silence. Because we often treat silence as the enemy of prayer, right? Or we try to use silence as a meditative technique to like tune into a secret spiritual frequency before we speak.
Right.
But the text suggests that in the Gethsemane model, silence comes after the movement.
Yes.
You state the relationship, you scream your desire, you open your hands to the outcome. And the silence that follows isn't an empty void. It is this profound space of companionship where words are simply no longer adequate.
It's the difference between the agonizing silence of being ignored by a stranger on the bus and the comfortable, thick silence of sitting next to a spouse of 50 years where everything necessary has already been spoken.
Oh, it's a perfect way to describe it. Let's be realistic about human nature for a second.
Always a good idea.
Reaching that level of open-handed, Gethsemane-level trust is incredibly difficult.
It's a lifelong process.
So what happens when a person is just furious? When the tragedy is so senseless and the pain is so deep that they cannot bring themselves to say, not my will, but yours.
Yeah.
If you are consumed by doubt and feel utterly abandoned, have you failed at prayer?
Not at all. And the text turns to the biblical Psalms to completely dismantle the idea that anger is a failure of faith.
Yeah, the Psalms are intense.
Astonishingly raw. You have authors crying out, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" Or, "Why do you hide your face?"
Yeah.
And this culminates in Jesus himself hanging on the cross, quoting Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
Which is wild to think about. To have the central figure of the faith screaming that he has been abandoned by God is a staggering inclusion in the biblical narrative.
It really is. Most religions would edit that part out.
Right.
But the theological analysis of that cry is crucial. The text observes the grammar of the protest.
Okay, the grammar.
Yes. As long as a person is screaming, "Why did you leave me?"
Yeah.
they are still using the pronoun you.
Oh.
They're still addressing the other party. The relationship is stretched to the absolute breaking point. The pain is blinding, but the connection has not been severed.
So the true opposite of prayer isn't doubt and it isn't anger.
No, the opposite of prayer is apathy.
Apathy.
It's the moment you have no one left to express your doubt to, when the relationship is so entirely dead that you don't even bother yelling at the sky anymore.
Wow.
Prayer, therefore, is not the absence of conflict. It is the resilient container that allows the most violent human conflicts to happen within the safety of the relationship.
I really want to explore the boundary of that container, though. Because if bringing our rage and doubt to God is a valid form of prayer, there still has to be a line where it becomes destructive.
Right?
Like, people do become bitter. They do walk away entirely.
They do, yeah.
And the text provides a contrast that I thought really clarified the difference between healthy doubt and toxic bitterness.
Yeah.
It contrasts figures like Abraham and Moses with the behavior of the Israelites in the desert at a place called Massa.
Yes, that distinction is vital, and it lies entirely in the posture of the human heart during the conflict.
How so?
Well, take Abraham. He famously argues with God over the impending destruction of the city of Sodom. He's literally negotiating the number of righteous people required to spare the city.
Right, he's haggling.
He is. And Moses does the same thing. He argues with God to spare the Israelites after they commit idolatry with the golden calf. They are both actively pushing back against the divine decree.
But they are doing it through a posture of open inquiry. They're arguing with a living being, attempting to appeal to God's own stated character of mercy. They leave room for God to respond and correct their limited perspective.
Right. They aren't issuing ultimatums.
Exactly. Which brings us to Massa. Contrast that open inquiry with the incident at Massa. The Israelites are wandering in the desert, and they run out of water. Their physical thirst is completely legitimate. They are in actual danger of dying.
It's a real crisis.
But the way they approach the divine shifts from a request for help into a rigid pass-fail test. They demand water and explicitly state, "Is the Lord among us or not?"
Yeah, that's the pivot. They turned a valid need for survival into an ultimatum.
Right. And think about how destructive that is in a human relationship.
Oh, it's toxic.
It's like a partner who intentionally picks a fight or creates a crisis just to see if you will bend over backwards to fix it.
Yeah.
They're operating under the assumption that if you don't respond exactly how they demand, it proves you never loved them at all. It's a totally rigged test.
It's a rig test, and it's the ultimate manifestation of the Eden suspicion.
The snakes lie.
Exactly. The mindset at Massa is, if God doesn't provide water in the exact time frame and manner we demand, it proves he is a malevolent competitor. And even if he does provide the water, we will still wake up tomorrow suspicious of his motives.
Because the trust is already gone.
Right. It's an endless cycle of demanding proof because the foundational trust is shattered.
So the text points out that genuine prayer is the mechanism that protects us from setting that exact trap.
Yes.
When we're in the darkest moments of our lives, prayer stops us from locking God into a definitive negative verdict based solely on our immediate suffering.
That's why the author used the example of Jesus predicting Peter's denial.
Oh, right. Let's unpack that.
So Jesus knows Peter's going to fail horribly. But Jesus doesn't pray that Peter is magically protected from making the mistake.
He doesn't pray for the test to go away.
Right. He prays that Peter's faith will not fail through the failure. He prays for his return.
So the failure, the tragedy, the silence, none of these are allowed to have the final defining word over the relationship.
Exactly.
But practically speaking, when someone hits that absolute rock bottom,
Yeah.
when the silence is just deafening, the doubt is overwhelming, and their current reality is screaming that they are utterly alone, how do they find their way back to that baseline of trust?
It's incredibly hard.
And the text introduces a psychological tool here that completely reframes how believers survive the darkness. It argues that in those moments, memory becomes a spiritual superpower.
Memory is everything here. And to illustrate the mechanics of this spiritual memory, the text dissects one of the most culturally pervasive stories Jesus told, the parable of the prodigal son.
Okay, let's look at the psychological landscape of that story because it's brilliant.
It is.
The younger son demands his inheritance early, which is essentially telling his father, "I wish you were dead so I could have your resources."
Yeah, quite the insult.
It's a huge insult. And he travels to what the text calls the far country. He squanders everything, a massive famine hits, and he finds himself in the most degrading situation possible for a first-century Jewish man, starving to death while feeding pigs.
He is at absolute rock bottom. He is totally separated from the source of life.
Right. And then the Gospel of Luke uses a very specific Greek phrase to describe his turning point. Is huton elton. Probably butchered the pronunciation.
No, that's pretty close. And the literal translation is he came to himself.
He came to himself.
Yes. Now, modern Western audiences, steeped in our, highly individualistic psychology, we routinely misinterpret this phrase.
How so?
We project our cultural narrative onto the text and assume the son went on a journey of self-discovery, right? Like he found his inner strength, realized his authentic truth, and decided to pull himself up by his bootstraps.
Right. It gets treated like this spiritual eat, pray, love moment, like I am enough.
Exactly. But the biblical context aggressively rejects that interpretation of self-reliance.
Right.
For the ancient audience, coming to himself did not mean isolating his inner truth. It meant recovering his identity through the act of remembering his father.
Oh, wow. This is where the concept of memory becomes an active weapon.
Yes.
Because look at the cognitive dissonance happening in the son's mind. The visceral, immediate reality of the far country.
The pigs, the famine.
Yeah, the stench of the pigs, the gnawing hunger in his stomach, the isolation. It's all screaming a definitive verdict. Life is purely scarcity. You are utterly alone. Your actions have isolated you beyond repair.
But then,
his memory interrupts that narrative. His memory argues back against his current reality, saying, wait, my father's hired hands have bread to spare.
the memory of his father's inherent abundance and generosity fractures the absolute despair of his immediate environment.
Yeah. And the text takes this dynamic and applies it directly to how believers navigate profound inner emptiness and tragedy today.
It's a direct parallel.
When your current situation, a sudden bankruptcy, the loss of a child, a chronic illness, when that situation screams that the universe is cold and God has abandoned you, prayer becomes the deliberate act of letting memory answer back.
It's why the ancient Israelites constantly recited the narrative of the Exodus.
Reminding themselves of God's track record.
Exactly, reminding themselves of God's track record of liberation whenever they were facing a new oppressor. Memory acts as the anchor when the storm of current circumstances threatens to pull the believer into total nihilism.
And the text makes a really vital distinction here, which I appreciated.
What's that?
Utilizing memory in this way is not engaging in autosuggestion.
No, definitely not.
It is not the toxic positivity that demands a person look at a horrific tragedy and desperately search for the blessing in disguise.
Ugh, yeah, that is so damaging. That the text actually validates the horror. You are fully permitted to look at the tragedy and say, this is wrong, this is agonizing, and I hate it. But what spiritual memory does is it prevents that single agonizing chapter from becoming the final judge and jury of God's entire character.
Yeah.
It keeps a narrow window open in the darkness.
Just a crack.
Just a crack. And keeping that window open allows God the opportunity to do what the biblical narrative insists he does best: shatter our limited expectations.
Which brings us back to the end of the prodigal son story.
Yes.
Because if we look at the conclusion of that story, the son uses his memory to construct a highly negotiated plan.
Right, he prepares a whole speech.
He assumes his father's mercy has strict limits. He plans for return, deliver this meticulously crafted apology, and beg to be treated as a wage laborer. He basically updates his image of his father to be slightly less generous, assuming he has to earn his keep.
But the reality of the father utterly destroys that negotiated image.
Completely shatters it.
When the father sees the son approaching, he completely abandons the cultural dignity of an older patriarch. I mean, he hikes up his robes and sprints down the road. He doesn't even allow the son to finish his rehearsed speech. He embraces him, restores his status with a family ring, and initiates a massive celebration.
The real living father constantly overflows the son's calculated expectations.
And the author argues that this is the ultimate function of prayer.
To be overwhelmed by the reality of God.
Exactly. It's not about perfectly articulating our needs. It's about cultivating an openness that allows the real God to constantly overwhelm and correct our inherently distrustful, limited image of him. It's the lifelong process of unlearning the Eden suspicion.
But unlearning that suspicion takes rigorous daily practice.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a one-and-done deal.
So how do we practically calibrate our minds to this reality?
Well, the text guides us toward the most universally recognized prayer in the Christian tradition, the Lord's Prayer.
The Our Father.
Right. But it challenges us to stop viewing it as a laundry list of magical requests,
Yeah.
and instead analyze it as a highly sophisticated step-by-step psychological unlearning of mistrust.
I love this part. The structural breakdown of the prayer in the text is so illuminating. Every line is a calculated strike against the suspicions born in the garden.
Let's walk through it.
Okay, so it begins with Our Father. Before a single need is expressed, the person praying is forced to verbally establish the nature of the relationship.
Right. You are actively declaring that God is not a competitor, not a distant tyrant, but the intimate source of life.
Abba.
Exactly.
And the next line, hallowed be thy name, shifts the focus away from our immediate panic. The text interprets this as a request for God's true character to be revealed.
Right.
It's basically saying, let your inherent goodness shine through, regardless of how terrifying my current circumstances are.
Then the prayer moves to, Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Now, this is perhaps the most misunderstood line in the whole prayer.
Because it sounds so passive.
It does. It sounds like a sigh of passive resignation, just accepting whatever misery comes our way.
Yeah.
But it's not. It is a proactive, radical request to bring divine life into human spaces of death and dysfunction.
But crucially, it does so without forcing God into our preferred, limited scenario. It's the surrender of our tiny, anxiety-driven kingdoms of control to a broader, life-giving vision.
Gethsemane again. Not my will.
Exactly.
But I appreciate that the prayer doesn't devolve into pure, detached spiritualism, because the next line is, Give us our daily bread.
Oh yeah, very physical.
The author emphasizes that trusting the divine doesn't mean ignoring the reality of the human body. We have physical needs, food, shelter, security, and bringing those stark realities into the relationship is a vital part of prayer.
It absolutely is. And the transition to the next part, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, introduces a critical circulatory system to the theology of prayer.
A circulatory system.
Yeah, because the life-giving nature of God is not meant to pool stagnant within the individual.
Okay.
If you are receiving grace and returning to the Father, that grace must flow dynamically through you toward the people who have harmed you. If you dam up the forgiveness, the relationship chokes.
That makes total sense. And the final petition, lead us not into temptation, takes on a profound gravity when viewed through the lens of what we discussed earlier regarding massa.
Oh, yes.
Because it's not some petty request to avoid stealing a cookie or cheating on a test.
No.
It is a desperate plea for protection from circumstances so overwhelmingly dark, so crushingly silent, that we might be tempted to definitively condemn God and walk away from the relationship entirely.
Don't let me build a rigged test.
Exactly. Don't let me end up at Massa.
Yeah. And when you look at the architecture of the entire prayer like that, it reveals what the divine actually desires from humanity.
Which is not blind obedience.
No. The biblical God is not interested in manufacturing a race of mindless automatons that perfectly execute instructions downloaded from above. The goal is the cultivation of humans who learn to independently recognize, choose, and nurture life.
Right.
And prayer is the fundamental calibration point for that massive evolutionary process.
The text describes it as a continuous, almost respiratory loop.
A respiratory loop is an excellent analogy. Think about it. You step out into the chaos of the world and absorb the reality of suffering, beauty, and conflict. You inhale the human experience.
Okay.
Then you retreat into prayer to name that reality before God. You sit in the resulting silence. You calibrate your heart to his character.
Yeah.
Then you make a decision based on that calibration, and you exhale your actions back into the world. You observe the fruit of those actions, you gain wisdom, and that wisdom drives you right back into prayer for the next breath.
So it's a relentless, lifelong cycle of aligning human agency with divine intent.
Precisely.
And that loop perfectly clarifies what Jesus meant when he talked about the kingdom of God. Because we have this tendency to think we have to magically manufacture some utopian society through our own exhausted efforts. But the text highlights that the kingdom is already drawn near.
Right.
Prayer is simply the action of unlocking the door.
Right.
We choose to step out of our exhausting, hypervigilant kingdoms of self-preservation, and we step into the reality of God's kingdom.
We finally hand over the pen and allow the author to finish the story.
Yeah. Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of theological and psychological ground today.
We really have.
And the mission of this analysis was to completely deconstruct the notion of prayer as a transaction. And looking comprehensively at this text, the conclusion is just unavoidable. Prayer is never a technique to force God to be good.
No, His goodness entirely precedes our asking.
Right. It is, at its core, a return to the Father.
It is a fiercely protected space of silence that honors the necessity of human freedom.
Yeah.
It is a relational container durable enough to hold our most violent doubts and deepest angers without shattering. And it's a rigorous school of memory that teaches us how to bear the weight of life and share it rather than merely surviving it.
As we wrap up, I want to circle back to the opening frustration we talked about, the feeling of pouring your heart out to a silent universe.
Yeah.
Because we get so angry when we treat prayer like a vending machine, right?
Yeah.
We put in our coins, press the button, and the coil doesn't turn.
Right.
We look at the silence, we look at the unhealed diseases and the fractured communities around us, and we conclude, the machine is broken. God has abandoned the post.
Yeah, that's the default response.
But there was a concept buried deep in the conclusion of this text that profoundly shifted my perspective, and I really want to leave our listeners with this to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
The author observed that people who commit themselves to this deep, non-transactional calibration loop of prayer often arrive at a startling realization. They ask God to send an intervention. They beg him to send someone to fix a localized agony. And through the slow, agonizing process of aligning their desires with the divine character, they suddenly realize that God is sending them.
Wow.
Yeah. If the ultimate grand design of prayer is not to change God's mind to suit our preferences, but to rigorously calibrate the human heart until we naturally adopt God's own life-giving posture,
Right.
then perhaps the greatest, most terrifying miracle of unanswered prayer is that it creates a vacuum, a specific gaping hole in the universe designed exclusively for us to step into.
Oh, that is crazy to think about.
So the next time you find yourself staring at that broken vending machine, completely devastated by God's silence regarding a massive injustice or a broken situation in your life, you have to ask yourself a fundamentally different question.
Yeah.
Is this silence a cold denial of your request? Or is it God deliberately stepping back, refusing to dominate the human story, and offering you the profound, terrifying freedom to become the very answer you've been begging for?
That reframes the silence entirely. It moves from abandonment to an invitation.
An invitation to stop hiding and start walking. Until next time, keep diving deep.